For being here today. I know we've been covering a lot of years of history, and we've been covering a lot of material. Tommy and I really would like for you to join in the discussion, and so if you have comments, if you have corrections, if I get lost and wander off somewhere, bring me back to where I'm supposed to be headed here, which is quite easy for me and for today's context too. So, but please, if you have a question, or Tommy will be glad to answer it. We'll work our way through it. We want you to be a full part of this class and join us in everything that we do. So last week, Tommy got us down to a little ways into the list of kings on both sides of the aisle, for the kingdom of Israel and for the kingdom of Judah. I just wanted to kind of go back and kind of look at things that we have covered, things that, the reason I'm hesitating, the slide's not showing up the way I thought it was going to show up. So let me get with the slide. There are 4 or 5 major empires that will cover the time period that we're talking about. The one that is of most interest to us right now, the one that is probably of the most interest for the majority of the time, is the Assyrian Empire, the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Covers from about 911 to 605 BC. And they were extremely strong. We've looked at maps before, Assyria being in the northern part of what we call the Middle East now, really the part of Iraq, Iran, and even Turkey, where they dominated. And they had great dominance over the northern kingdom of Israel and its entire population. There are others that we will go forward with as we work our way through. The biblical history and the secular history both mention many of the rulers that were involved with the Neo-Assyrian Empire. There's a Neo-Babylonian Empire that picked up in 612 as the Assyrian Empire was beginning to fail and was losing its power, losing its influence, losing its strength, and we'll cover that later. And I'm going to skip over those for right now. Tommy talked about Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, and those were kings that he covered last week, just to kind of put things in perspective. Jeroboam, Nabab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, and Tibni. That's kind of where we want to pick up today. If you remember, Zimri was responsible for the death of King Elah. And what you'll notice during all of this history is that there's palace intrigue. The worst thing for you as a king is to have servants around you, because one of them thinks they ought to be you. And that's the way it always turns out. A lot of the killings and a lot of the end of the reigns of the kings are results of killings that they suffered at the hand of one of their followers, cupbearers, guards even. It's really not much different. Is this echoing? It's really not much different than the intrigue that we see in recent history, really in the time of Europe, even in our present day history, is it? The things that we see in the history of Israel tell us that the world has basically always been in sin and been different. It has always been in sin, and the things that we think are inventions of modern times were done long ago. The intermarriage to produce strong kings and kingdoms and empires, the intrigue in the palace, if you will, the killing of the kings to secure the future succession lines or to change the succession lines. All of those things, you know, you always go back to the fact that there's nothing new in the world. There's nothing new. It's always been this way. The world has always been corrupted since the time that Adam and Eve brought sin into the world. It just manifests itself in a different way, in different styles, in different forms at different times. And so I say that as a point of optimism that our time is not any worse than time has been through history. And yet we've seen glorious moments of coming of Christ. We've seen the redemption of us from our sins through Christ's sacrifice. There is hope, as Daniel talked about this morning, for the future. Zimri killed Elah. Zimri only reigned 7 days, plus or minus a few hours. And he wound up committing suicide. When he was oppressed by other members of the kingdom in a battle, he resorted to his palace. And when he saw that he was losing ground, he set the palace on fire and died in the fire. Right, Tommy? And so his was a short-lived reign. So here you have people plotting to get things that they wanted, or at least they thought they wanted, and it brought no happiness, it brought no success, it brought no peace, it didn't bring anything except the realization that he was weak and he committed suicide by burning himself inside his burning palace. I mention this because when we're leading into this, on Zimri's death, we have a bit of a power struggle between, many historians believe, between the tribes of Israel, at least a couple of the tribes of Israel. And the reason for the next 6 years, 5 or 6 years, that we have a dual kingship in the northern kingdom or in Israel is because one tribe is trying to reassert its influence or its dominance over the other tribes of Israel. And so Tibni is a relatively unknown before he ascended to claim himself as king, and so, during his kingship, and afterwards, he's still relatively unknown. In fact, many lists that you look at will not list Tibni as a king of the northern kingdom. His competition was Omri, and we'll talk about him in just a minute. But the first 6 years after Zimri's death was a split northern kingdom. So now we not only have the split Israel between northern kingdom and Judah, now we have the northern kingdom split into the supporters of Tibni and the supporters of Omri. And Omri actually was the choice of the army. He was a mighty warrior, as we'll see. And just as a reminder and a reflection, Asa is king over in Judah at this time. And it gets really confusing crossing the aisle, crossing this timeline. But just as a reminder, Asa is king. Omri actually ultimately won the battle, the civil war in the northern kingdom. It lasted for 6 years. Omri ruled for about 11 or 12 years. So half of his reign was in a civil war with Tibni. And that's never a good thing when you have civil war. Remember, all these people are fundamentally, at least in where I grew up, they're all cousins with each other. You know, this is family affair. This is the kingdom of Israel. All of the people were kin in some shape, form, or fashion. So there's a lot of internecine jealousy among the tribes, even at this early point, or at this particular point of history. And one may have fallen out of power with God for various reasons. They're trying to reassert themselves in a human way by taking the kingship away. Omri founded what's known as the third dynasty. There's 3 generations, 4 kings in this dynasty. He was a mighty warrior, and his primary claim to fame is that he built, or he really has 2. He built a capital at Samaria and made Samaria the prominent place of power and influence in the northern kingdom. His lifestyle was a very wicked lifestyle. He had almost no redeeming values of his own over time. In fact, his name became, and we see this in Micah, the 6th chapter, where he talks about the statues of Omri. If you wanted to say something about a group of people or about a person, you would use the statues of Omri as a reference point to say, this person is evil, this person is no good, this person has ill intent, poor motivation, and those kinds of things. So the character of his life, even though he was a mighty king, even though he controlled a lot of territory, even though he was a mighty warrior, his personal life, his spiritual life was a wreck. And we know that even being a mighty warrior, as described by literature, Omri actually was subservient to Ben-Hadad the king of Syria. Now, the Assyrian Empire, we know again, is up in the northern part, over the northern part of Israel, basically where Syria is today, where Lebanon is today, where parts of Iran and Iraq are. So even being a mighty warrior within the northern kingdom against his cousins and all, and maybe even some outside forces, he was not a dominant power. He was really a vassal to King Ben-Hadad the first. He had to pay tribute to him. He was taking orders from him, if you will. Remember in this time period, when one country went to war with another and took over the territory, they didn't necessarily clean out the territory. There are basically 2 models. One was they cleaned out the territory, took everybody in captivity back and dispersed them in other places back in the homeland, took them out of their homeland. Or they just left them alone and made them pay tribute to the king. And in this case, Ben-Hadad's influence left Omri alone in the northern kingdom of Israel to run the spiritual life, the day-to-day life of the Israelites under his influence. May prove to be a mistake in the long run. I need to turn around. I hate to turn my back to you. This is Omri's dynasty. You can see that it covers all the way up into what now is Lebanon, and it was Phoenicia in that time. This is Sidon and Tyre. Pretty good vast territory. Even on the east side of the Jordan River, he had significant holdings and power and influence. Just to kind of get a geographic, Judah's down here minding its own business. Well, kind of, sort of, because the Egyptians are giving Judah some trouble coming out of the southwest here and attacking them in this particular area. So fundamentally, the history of Israel secularly is that they're continuously at war with somebody. They're at war either with the Egyptians or the Moabites or the Ammonites or Assyria, or later on the Babylonians. This is Damascus, Syria, just to give you a reference point. But they were in constant battle with each other. So there really was not much time of peace that you would think that God's chosen people would enjoy. So Omri basically, because he was subservient, because he was not as strong as he thought he was, he eventually lost the kingship. He eventually died and was buried with the kings. And Ahab which may be one of the more familiar kings of the northern kingdom that you know, succeeds his father in 874 as the king of the northern kingdom. Now, Ahab, you probably could, all of you could write a thesis on Ahab and all of his troubles and everything that he had. And we're going to touch on a few of those. Ahab basically, Ahab has a lot in common with Adam, just as kind of a broad perspective, because the greatest influence in Adam's life turned out to be not God, but whom? His wife. The greatest influence in Ahab's life, and the reason for his downfall, was who? It was Jezebel. She was, I don't think I've ever known, through all my school connections and everything, anybody named Jezebel. Has anybody ever known? It's just not a popular name, is it? It's not one that you want the character of that name associated with a member of your family. So Ahab and Jezebel really together have come to stand in the course of history as an example of extreme selfishness, extreme wickedness, extreme cruelty. It's just not a really good situation. Actually, Jezebel came from, she was a child of the king of Sidon, which is up here in Phoenicia. So this was an intermarriage between the king who went up here to secure an alliance with Phoenicia and married Jezebel, which turned out not to be a really good decision for him. Randy? You have? Well, I'd be interested in finding out more later. I wouldn't ask you to disclose a lot. Okay. Can you speak a little louder? It's your story. If everybody didn't hear that, he met a lady at dinner one night that her father had given her the name of Jezebel when she was born because he was drunk. Doesn't that fit? Doesn't that fit? That's the first time I've ever seen or heard that story or a story like that. Ahab actually did some miraculous things to secure the future of the northern kingdom. He rebuilt Jericho. He refortified the cities of the northern kingdom, made them stronger against these invading forces. If you remember that map, everybody around the northern kingdom was invading. And so he made it a much more secure time. He did establish the seat of power in Samaria, and it stayed that way until the fall of the Babylonian captivity of Israel. We could go down this rabbit hole with Elijah, but it is about 10 years into his reign, Ahab's reign, that Elijah appears on the scene as a prophet of God and makes his predictions, all of which come true later on. Now, Ahab was not as secure as he wanted to be. He was in constant battle. He actually had some success in routing the Syrian king Ben-Hadad I, but he made a mistake. He allowed Ben-Hadad to survive, and that later came back to haunt him in the second battle. So I guess the moral there is total obliteration of your enemies if you have the opportunity. And we know that God many times told the conquering army to completely wipe out everything: men, women, children, animals, etc., etc. But Ahab, actually, we'll come back and talk about this a little bit more, about this battle a little bit later. What's probably the first story that you think of when you think about Ahab and Jezebel? Now, come on, folks. Prophets of Baal, that would be one. The dogs in the street. Naboth's vineyard. All of those answers are correct. They all are associated with Ahab and with Jezebel. I think the selfishness part of their reign together and her immense influence over Ahab, this is really a telling story. And all of you know the story. At Samaria, Ahab was expanding his kingdom, wanting to expand his palace. Naboth's vineyard was in the way. He couldn't get Naboth to sell it to him, give it to him. And he actually, this shows the strength of some of us men, I guess. What did Ahab do when he couldn't get what he wanted? He took to bed, whining and crying. And I mean, literally, he was weak in that regard. He took to bed, feigned sickness, and wouldn't come out of his palace. It's Jezebel who went in and said, I think I've got the solution for you in this particular problem. And what was her solution? It's the same. Her solution was to kill Naboth. She came up with a scheme, and we won't go into that scheme, but basically to kill Naboth, and then Ahab could take over the vineyard and expand his palace as he wanted to do, which was a very selfish thing in and of itself for him to want such immense power and wealth. You know, Tommy had a quite extensive list a couple of weeks ago about the influence of marrying foreign wives. What did Ahab do? Ahab, a legitimate Jew to the throne, went out and married a woman from Sidon. Her influence on him was tremendous. And what did it lead to? His downfall. Actually, both of their downfall later on. That was really kind of God's plan, wasn't it? He told them not to do something, and they did it anyway. And they always wound up doing what? Paying the price. And it really didn't matter whether it was the king who had the bad idea or the queen who had the bad idea. The fact is that together they had the bad idea that went against God's teaching and his will. During all of this time that Ahab and Jezebel are ruling, there is the Syrian strengthening up in Damascus and up in this area. And you'll see in the scripture many times the word Aram. Aram is really just a name for this area, east of Phoenicia, north of the kingdom of Israel, and a part of the Neo-Syrian Empire, and very strong and wanting more territory down here. So they were constantly being a threat and invading around the borders. And there are several battles that occurred all around this area, the area around the Sea of Galilee. What's impressive to me is that all of this history happened really relatively in a small geographic area. We're not talking about war that, go back to World War II. The amount of geography that was included in World War II was immense. This is really like having a world history occur in a place the size of Davidson County, let's say. It's a little bit bigger than that. Davidson, it's all relatively confined, which is always amazing to me. And always in the middle of it is the Jordan River, the Dead Sea, and the Sea of eventually becomes known as the Sea of Galilee. It's known by several other names during this particular time. Well, Ahab had in his mind that rather than being dominated by the leaders of Aram, that he was going to dominate them. So he made a pact with somebody we haven't talked about yet, and that's Jehoshaphat, who was king over in Judah. And he wanted a joint pact with him to join forces to go up and fight the leaders of Aram. And they did. They went and engaged them. They didn't have a lot of success. Ahab actually was mortally wounded and died in his chariot, as Elijah had prophesied would happen to him in a particular battle. There are actually two battles fought at this particular site. But in the first one, Ahab was mortally wounded and died in his chariot. And when they took Ahab back to Samaria, they washed out his chariot where he had bled to death by a random shot, actually, of an arrow, almost a miraculous hit, if you would say, that it penetrated his armor in exactly the right place to kill him. But he bled in the chariot. They took the chariot when they brought him back home, took it down to the pool of Siloam in that area, and washed his chariot out, chariot out there in exactly the same place that Naboth's blood had been shed. Another prophecy that was fulfilled, predicted by Elijah way before Ahab died. So we constantly see God at work here in the background, if you will, of all of these particular happenings. We also know that what happened to Jezebel. What happened to Jezebel? Two of her own servants, after this battle, as the word was getting back, two of her own servants did what? Threw her off the balcony. Threw her off the balcony into the street, and she died from the fall. And then what happened? Dogs came and ate her, licked up her blood. Who had predicted that? Elijah had predicted that. There's just some reassurance. Well, let me say there's some constancy in all of these things. God says, man does, man pays the penalty for not doing. I mean, if you want to sum up the history of the world from the beginning of time till today, it really falls in those three categories, doesn't it? God said, do or don't do this particular thing. Man decides to do or not do the opposite of what God has commanded, winds up in trouble, pays with his physical life, pays with his spiritual life, pays the ultimate price. But even young children know the story of Jezebel and Ahab and how she died. Well, when Ahab dies, he's succeeded by his son Uzziah in 853. He had a very short reign of just a few months, actually. And what's known of him and his leadership of the northern kingdom at this time is that he lived like his mother and father, which is not a great compliment. Now, in today's world, if somebody said your son or daughter lived the same kind of life that you were living, we would generally take that as a compliment, wouldn't we? And so would most other people take that as a compliment if our children live the same kinds of lives, at least for the group of people in this room. Well, it's not heard as frequently maybe as it used to be. But generally, overwhelmingly, it would be a compliment. Well, this is not a compliment because Uzziah was, just like his mother and father, evil to the core, did nothing positive, and actually had a very short reign, and he died because he was clumsy. Now, I'm having, in recent months, much more appreciation for the word clumsy. It means a lot more to me. To get my brain to realize where my feet are is sometimes a major task. I don't enjoy that. Well, I don't know why Uzziah fell, but he fell on a lattice in his palace, and he ultimately died from that fall, from that injury, just as who had prophesied? Elijah. So Elijah comes on the scene here relatively recently, makes all these predictions, and then sits back and watches all of them come true. Would that not send a message to the people around them? If Jan Cronin stood up at the pulpit next week and made these three predictions, and in the next month all three of them came true, would that not get our attention? I think it would, wouldn't it? But humankind being what it is, including us today, they paid no attention to what God was trying to tell them through the prophecies and the fulfillment of the prophecies. I just want you to get an idea that how does this map look from back there? It really looks fuzzy to me. Maybe that's just, maybe I need to take off my glasses or something. But basically, the ministry of Elijah and Elisha was all in the northern kingdom. They had very little to do with the kingdom of Judah. Their work was in this area. And if you could read this, if we made it larger, you could see many of the things that they did, many of the prophecies they made, where they came true and how they came true. But just know that Elijah and Elisha's work was in the northern kingdom almost primarily. So Uzziah died from the fall. Not much to talk about. He's succeeded by his brother. And this is where it gets really confusing for me, because there were two Jehorams, one in the northern kingdom and one in the southern kingdom. And I'll confess, I may get some of the facts confused between the two, not intentionally, but it's just my age, I guess. But Uzziah is succeeded by his brother Jehoram, or sometimes more commonly known as Joram, in 852, who had about a 9 or 10 year reign. And he was, in fact, a good king. He was a good king. He put down the worship of Baal, which had been associated with his mother and father, strongly. Jezebel, the worship of Baal. But like many other leaders, many other people in the Bible, it didn't last. He actually tore down temples to the other gods that these foreigners had brought into Israel. He cleaned up, if you will, he cleaned up the religious side of Israel a little bit. But then he became obsessed with his own victories, if you will. He became obsessed with his own power. And he began to slide backwards and relapses into idol worship, just as his mother and father had done. And the result of that idol worship for Uzziah was 7 years of famine came to the area. Very distressing time. And in this time of weakness, when Uzziah was away from God and when Uzziah was becoming less popular, if you will, the Moabites decided that they would revolt because they had been under the thumb of the northern kingdom for decades, for a long period of time. They'd been oppressed. They were aggravated about it. They didn't like being ruled by the Israelites. And they saw their opportunity during this time of famine to revolt. And they did gain some level of independence, some level of self-governance. So from this standpoint, it was a successful venture. And I have there at the end that Uzziah was killed by Jehu. And that's kind of where we're going to leave the northern kingdom. And we'll come back and pick up the northern kingdom there next week and explain exactly what happened between Jehu and Uzziah. Now, over in Judah, on the other side of the aisle, if you will, Asa was the king. We mentioned him earlier from 911 to 870. He had a very successful and long reign. In fact, his name, by definition, means curing or physician. He put down unnatural vices. He reformed the religious and moral abuses that were prevalent in the land of Judah at this time. He repaired Shishak's plunder of the temple. Remember, we talked about Shishak, who was a king or pharaoh of Egypt, and in an earlier time had invaded Judah and had carried off many of the temple treasures and torn down parts of the temple, destroyed it. And so Judah regained some of that, replaced some of it, made some of it better than it was. He also had a strong military buildup, which brought another invasion from Egypt. What you have to keep in mind is there is no constancy in the relationship between Israel and any of the people around it. On Monday, they're friends and they get along with each other and support each other. On Tuesday, the north is battling the south. On Wednesday, they're together battling the east. And on Thursday, they're split again, both of them battling the Philistines and the Egyptians. There's just no constancy of relationship here. Every month, every year, it changes, creating alliances, trying to secure their own power. And as Asa built up his military, Zerah the Cushite, who historians believe was really an Ethiopian. And this may be a bit of a revelation to some of us, that it is believed that several of the leaders of Egypt at this time were not what we would say born and bred Egyptians. They were people from the land of Cush, from the land of Ethiopia. They were not natives to the Egyptian area necessarily. Again, they didn't have strict borders. The borders were very fluid. Well, Zerah was a Cushite, believed to be an Ethiopian, and was a king of Egypt in 898. And he, about 20 or 30 years before the end of Asa's reign, he actually invaded Judah and carried off plunder. Greg?
You know, the point that you make about constancy of relationship is a very real thing in our culture today in relation to the church, scripture. When I was younger, it was basically an inherited faith. Families were continually members of the church through generations. They usually did marry too much out of their faith. And now, because of what we're bombarded with from the negative, as well as things that would draw us away, what the scripture, what use the idea and the excuse of, well, I know about this, I know about that, it could be me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But these things are all actual choices that we make. And I think we have to be guarded from the standpoint of our souls and our relationship and following what the scriptures tell us by not being swept away on a daily basis by what we are bombarded with electronically as well as others. And that's, I think if we will do that, then we can bring ourselves back to a stronger place in our faith.
And that pretty well wraps up our class. Well said. Well said. You know, why do people live in communities? It's for the relationship, isn't it? It's for the relationship, the interdependency, and as has been described very eloquently, that's what we ought to seek. That's what we seek in the body of Christ, isn't it? Here, not just here. Go back to the 1800s, the 1700s. Pick any century during history, and it's the lack of relationship, the lack of community, forming a bond of trust in each other, having the same aspirations and the same goals, that oftentimes leads to downfall and trouble. Good points. Yes.
I was at a workshop a couple of months ago, and they said people get sick in groups, and they get healed in groups. So if I get sick in a group, I either need to find a group where I can get well or change the health of the group that I'm in. And so that's what we have. If I'm in a church or a group that's sick, I can either go somewhere else, or better yet, everybody work together to get well, and we can, James 5:16, if we'll confess where we're missing the mark and pray for each other, we can be healed.
It's that symbiotic relationship, isn't it? It's helping each other. And if you can make a choice. You can either choose to help the group grow and strengthen itself, or you can find a group where you are rewarded or spiritually rewarded and going, well said.
And Revelation says that you can be a live Christian in a dead church. Sardis was dead, but he said, you got a few there that are in pretty good shape. They go walk with me in white. So running from group to group is not necessarily the best answer.
Yeah. Yes. You know, which this is no revelation to you. You know, sometimes it's been said in Nashville, we have too many churches, too many congregations around. It doesn't work to create the kind of community that we need from the way that you're describing it, because somebody always has a place to go that's more to their ilk. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not a good thing. Oh, good. I don't control these slides that you're seeing, so I was as lost as you were. So I was waiting for them to come back. But being symbiotic with each other is really what Christianity is all about, isn't it? It's not the intrigue, it's not the jealousy, it's not the reach for power, it's the mutual supportive nature. That when we're weak, we're in trouble, we have a challenge, we're concerned, we need to lean on somebody, that somebody is there to help us through the process. That's really what church is all about. It's really what being a part of the body of Christ is all about. We don't see that here in this secular history. I know we combine biblical and secular history here, But if you just take the biblical side, we don't see it. If you take the secular side, Ben-Hadad, the first, the king of Syria, did not provide that kind of community, did not provide that kind of support. Well, neither did the king of Israel. So I notice we're running out of time, which is kind of unbelievable, but because of fear of civil war, Asa made a deal with Ben-Hadad the first and took the treasures of the temple to secure the alliance. Now, God was protective of a few things, and one of the things that he was most protective of was the temple and the functionality of the parts of the temple and the vast riches he had given to the temple. And so here we see that the king, because he's afraid that he's going to be invaded, Asa makes a deal with Ben-Hadad the first. And how does he secure that alliance? He took treasures of God out of the temple and gave them to Ben-Hadad. A direct violation of his faith, a direct violation of God's commandments, and he eventually paid the price for that because he lived the rest of his life in a very knowing and eventually deadly pain. Historians believe he suffered from gout for the rest of his life. And if you've ever had gout, you know that it's debilitating, it's painful. Sometimes you just have to suffer through the afflictions. It comes and goes. But that was his punishment for not doing what God had asked him to do, for making an unholy alliance, if you will, with Ben-Hadad to protect his kingship. And I think we're going to stop there because at his death, who appears on the scene? Who's the next king of Judah? Well, I know because I got this nice little chart up here, which most of you don't have. Actually, you do need to go out online and look for charts like this that give you some semblance of the overlapping nature of the kingships, because it really gets confusing because they both don't appoint kings at the same time, and the kingship doesn't end at the same time, and there's a lot of overlapping. But the next king to come along is Jehoshaphat, a name that's known by almost everybody who's studied any part of the scriptures. So we'll pick up with Jehoshaphat next week and continue our journey through the kings of the divided kingdom. Any last comments, thoughts? Anybody need to punch the person next to you to wake them up and let them know class is over? Thank you very much for your perseverance. I appreciate it.
If you're clever, say next week when you get to Jehoshaphat,